All right. All right. Thanks so much for doing this. My first question that I have for you is tell the audience, just a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the mental health space, and we can go from there.
Okay, thank you. So I started around 8 years ago, getting my MSW through the University of Maryland, and the inspiration came from my mother was a social worker, not clinically trained, but she's worked with a lot of populations and still continues to do work with a lot of immigrants in the DC metro area. So it's kind of my first taste working with people, helping people, and I kind of wanted to take it into the next step around beyond just doing like traditional social work to doing more mental health focused work. So being a therapist, running groups, doing mental health advocacy, different things like that. Um, my husband and I moved out to the West Coast, and I still continue this work today. And I work with all different populations. I'm a bilingual therapist, so I do therapy in Spanish and in English. But I also work with a lot of immigrant folks just because that is largely my own background of like my own family story, but also I've wanted to just open up mental health accessibility language conversations with a lot of our immigrant populations, first generation folks, to just have a space and somebody who can understand a little bit more of their experience. So,
hmm I'm wondering what my question is with regards to the immigrant population in the mental health space. What I don't know if you've done any research, but what have you known so far?
what do you mean? I'm sorry.
But like what's sort of the relationship between the immigrant population and mental health?
Okay. A lot of the folks I've worked with, and I've read this also in different publications, have experienced, adverse experiences either through their immigration stories, what they might have experienced in their country of origins, or what they might experience just acclimating into a different environment that they immigrate towards, and kind of like those experiences. Usually because a lot of the cultures that I personally work with, being Hispanic, Latinx, being Asian, being, from different countries, there's a lot of cultural emphasis to connect with like more natural supports, like family members, religious communities, other traditional spaces. But there isn't usually this tradition to talk to a mental health professional. So a lot of my clients, when I start working with them, it's probably sometimes the first times that they're working with a mental health professional, and they don't really like feel that trust or feel that safe space to be able to, kind of like fully open up. So that's some of the work that I like to do, both in terms of just like education, but also just connecting with people as people and just building like that safe space around like, hey, as your therapist, I am fully here for you, and we can talk about anything that's on your mind, that you feel like is bothering you or you feel like is weighing on you, as well as some of the good things that happen in life too, right? Because that's what I like to always say too. Therapy isn't just about the hard times, it's also celebrating the good stuff that happens in our lives. And I love to kind of like just create that space. In my community, in the Hispanic Latinx community, there's always a saying that lots of my clients always express. I even heard growing up that people usually say, like, oh, therapy I thought was just for crazy people, because that's what we're brought up thinking. And I love how in go by our clients like participating in therapy or me working with them, we get to really challenge that and be like, no, therapy's for anybody. You're, feeling great, you're doing really great in your career, you can still talk with a therapist. You are hitting a really rough spot, you can talk with a therapist. You're having a really challenging relationship with your family or a significant other, you can talk to a therapist. And I love how it's kind of like opening up this lens of, oh, you can only use therapy when, like stuff is really bad, to now kind of like this more acceptance of therapy of like anybody can talk to a therapist at any point, and that's okay. Right.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember having this conversation with my dad. He asked me like, well, why do you need mental health therapy? Well, because I need that help. I need that sort of, I got struggles and
Yeah.
I needed like an expert person to sort of guide me through, whatever I'm going through,
Yeah. And that's honestly too, that's what a lot of the conversations that I've had with a lot of folks from different places. And again, it's fun. Like even with people that I know personally in my own life who are immigrants and come from other countries, I love to talk to them about these things because I think through conversation, just like you're sharing, or just like I'm kind of like sharing with you, people start to open up and realize like, hey, therapy is there for everybody and it doesn't have to be only during the worst times. And your therapist can really be somebody that you develop a relationship with, you trust, you guys build your own sort of like unique time and space together that nobody else gets to touch. And that's sometimes really wonderful and healing for people.
Yeah.
Right.
Have you had therapy yourself?
Good question. For a long time, it wasn't as accessible to me, but ever since coming to Seattle, because I worked with a really good community of mental health practitioners that really kind of like drove home and would talk about the benefits of their own therapy, both in working on their own things, but also as a professional development space. I really kind of like pushed hard. And about 2 years ago, I started seeing my own therapist. And I have to say, it's been a very amazing experience. Both, I've learned a lot. I've gotten to work on myself and kind of give myself that space, but also I get to see some of the work from a different perspective, as not just like as a therapist, but also as a client, and kind of like feeling some of those relationship dynamics or some of those experiences around like sharing really hard parts of our story or just talking about the everyday stuff
Yeah.
in that space has brought a very different perspective.
Yeah, because I remember talking to a friend about a year or two ago, and she was like, I connect with a therapist
Mhm.
as a female therapist because I want to be seen and heard.
Yeah.
Was that like your same thought process when you were trying to select a therapist?
Definitely. I I have a supervisee that I work with because I'm also a therapy supervisor who always puts it in this like very lovely way of like we should be connected with therapists that share some of our identity points. Not all of them, but at least some, right? Because it creates a very important bonding experience and also a very important layer of understanding some of those parts of your story that somebody who's completely different or disconnected might not be able to have that same sort of like connection. And definitely in my own therapy journey, I saw that because I had that experience where I had somebody who is a woman and somebody who is a Latina as well practicing in the therapy space. And I felt very like safe and bonded and able to kind of like
Mm.
talk through, as opposed to if I didn't really have those connection points with that person, that relationship might be very different.
hmm And so let's switch gears and talk about, what are some of the things that your clients, because you work with the immigrant population in the mental health
Mhm.
space, what are some of the conversations that they tell you?
Well, right now, obviously, I there's a lot of people who are being affected. And again, I always want to express like this piece around like everything that's kind of happening in terms of immigration and how immigrants are
Right.
being seen in the United States at this moment goes beyond the Latino or Latinx community and it affects us all.
hmm
So obviously those are some of the conversations that have been like most relevant with some of my clients, and just either they themselves may not be immigrants, but they have people in their lives that they love and they care about who
Right.
are immigrants, and they're just, feeling a lot of negativity, a lot of aggression, a lot of, fear around like their migration status, to some of my clients who are, immigrants themselves. And they're kind of like going through a lot of those same questions and a lot of those themes. And, kind of just being a support, helping clients kind of just work through and connect with their emotional selves and bodies also just, helping people kind of like come to a place of like, hey, you're supported, you have people who you care about, your life is still, kind of like happening while all of this political sort of turmoil is going on.
Yeah.
um, for some of my other clients, I also talk about, and if this is something that's accessible to them, about advocacy and other spaces, just because I think when there's a lot of circumstances that are out of our control, we feel stuck. And I think sometimes it's really important to also kind of come back to where do we find our power within ourselves. And that can be like, I always advocate that can be like in a larger scale type of like advocacy, all the way
Hmm.
to how do you connect with your family members, community members that you really care about, so that way we're not isolated. So those are some of the pieces that are coming up, especially recently, that I've talked to a lot of people about.
Yeah, and I always ask therapists this, what are some of the modalities that you use in your work? Like in your particular case, what sorts of modalities do you use for the immigrant population to sort of help them go through, their struggles based on whatever they're going through?
So because I'm a social worker and I was trained originally as a social worker, we have this saying that like we never like to work from just one approach. I
Hmm.
know if you talk to like mental health, like mental health licensed counselors or marriage and family therapists, they might have a very different perspective. But because I was trained as a social worker and that was kind of like where I started off my early career, I kind of learned a blend of different things. So right now, I love to work from a relational psychodynamic theory, which is basically kind of like bringing in a lot of what am I learning about this client that's sitting across from me in the room? How do we experience each other in relationship to kind of understand how are they connecting with other people? What are some of the work that we can do? I do a lot of trauma work too, so it's really helpful to kind of bring in that perspective to open up the conversations around like how people have experienced trauma and being in relationship with others and how we can kind of bring that into a space of healing. I like to do that in combination with a lot of motivational interviewing work, um,
Hmm.
a lot of culture of origin work, a lot of IFS work as well, just because I think all of that stuff really blends together and it kind of helps people feel a lot less like, oh, this person is just trying to kind of like get information out of me and, like regurgitate some sort of interpretation, or this person is just being nice to me, and brings a lot of depth into the work to kind of like really have really real moments, have vulnerability, practice maybe some of those skills that sometimes can be really difficult with our loved ones or friends or people that we want to connect with, and kind of bringing it into real time. I'm also a really big practitioner on unconditional positive regard, just because I
Mm.
feel like a lot of clients, especially for my immigrant clients, they have been in a lot of these spaces where they haven't been fully welcomed or received as themselves. And I think just having somebody who's there to support them in a way that's genuine and connective and, again, celebrates their story
Hmm.
helps them sort of kind of like start to like incorporate a lot of those feelings within themselves. And it's beautiful to see that transformation from when they start working with me and they're like, oh, you're just saying that thing to be nice to me, to then just like starting to see it's like, no, I'm calling out something that you did
Hmm.
because you've been through it really hard, like
Yeah.
part of your life, or this has been really hard and you're doing it now, to then starting to kind of like interpret and integrate that language into themselves. And
Hmm.
I think that combination, obviously, like, with modifications of what my clients might need from me, is kind of how I like to work with people. And I always tell them, I'm like, I'm not here to interpret your life. I am not here to be like, well, this is what's going on with you. I'm not here to diagnose you. We're here to connect as people, and I'm here to support you in whatever this journey of therapy looks like. So,
Yeah, yeah, you're in charge of your own sort of destiny, I guess.
yeah,
But
yeah.
my next question is, what have you learned in doing this kind of work? Is there anything that you sort of take away with working with the immigrant population that I never thought about this before, or I could relate to that in some way.
I think something I've taken away, well, a couple of things. Um, I always leave with just like so much admiration of the people that I work with, right? Because I think another dynamic that comes up often, especially with clients who this might be their first time in therapy or they might have like that immigrant experience, is they walk into the room and they're like, "Oh, well, you're the expert. You're supposed to tell me like what to do and then I'll feel better." Right? And I think something that always leaves me amazed is clients often have a lot of that resilience and power within themselves. And again, I'm not here to like necessarily like tell them what to do. I'm here to help as a partner to unlock what that looks like for them. And it's so amazing to see because you can see somebody struggling with emotions, with their relationships, with all of these things. And then one thing starts to kind of like pull through, and all of a sudden you start to see that transformation. And it's just beautiful to watch. I think that's like one of the biggest like transformative pieces that I've seen. And it just leaves me amazed in like that human sort of way of like the spirit and resilience of people and how that comes across cultures, across countries, across languages, across all of these things. Um, I think the other piece that comes through is a lot of people are looking for that sense of vulnerability. And that looks different, right? And that also like
Hmm.
shows up differently in different stages. Where like sometimes I get clients who like tell me it's like, oh yeah, I trust you. Like I'll tell you everything. And I'm like, it's okay if you don't. That's fine, right? And they
Yeah.
kind of just look at me like, well, what do you mean? Like I'm telling you, I trust you. And it's like, what I like to kind of like always say is like, okay, great that we have like this initial trust, but we also just started working together. But I think what I like to also see is like throughout time, we get to have like a deeper and more connected experience. And you really start to see somebody cry in front of you and feel comfortable doing that, or somebody expressing like how angry something made them. And just like that feeling of being okay with all of the parts of ourselves is something beautiful that I like to see in the work that I do with clients. And, again, I'm very honored to be a partner in that experience. And especially for immigrant clients where, again, it's not something that we've grown up with, right? Like both you and I have kind of like talked to that experience. It's kind of
Hmm.
like, oh, well, we kind of just deal with our things by ourselves or within our families. We don't really seek out that external help. But when we do get to experience it and we really get to kind of like go through that relationship development with our therapist, it's a beautiful thing. So
Hmm. So, and what do you still hope to learn in terms of something new? Is there anything like on the horizon that you sort of learn in terms of something new? Like I want to look at a certain a dynamic this way, or you know what I mean? Like,
that is a very good question. And I always say this to both my clients and my colleagues in this work, like therapy, you never like learn everything about therapy, right? And the name of the game, like both in our professional sort of like development of like how we have to keep our licensure, but also just like the nature of this work, you're always going to be evolving, right? So
mm-hmm,
I think something that I definitely want to delve into a little bit more and kind of like possibly integrate into the future is incorporating animal therapy. Just because like I am such a big lover of animals
I am
and
too. So,
yeah, and like, I think animals have such a beautiful like healing and calming and grounding sort of experience. And I've been fascinated for a long time on how we can integrate that into the therapeutic space. So my hopes is like sometime in the near future, I'll be able to kind of like integrate, having a therapy dog in session to not necessarily like run the session or be like, okay, dog, do your thing, but more like if somebody is having a really tough time and they really like connect with animals and I know that about them, I can offer that therapeutic like tool or piece and component while we're processing something really difficult, or to re-regulate and kind of create a space of grounding. And I've done some research and some trainings on that, but I hope to start integrating that into my practice, just because, like, again, animals are so wonderful and they have such a healing, like energy about them. And they literally just don't, like they're just being themselves. They're genuine. They create a lot of safety. They're lovely.
Yeah.
They're cuddly. And I think bringing that into a space where it can kind of like be utilized in a more therapeutic sense can be something that's powerful. And I hope a lot of other therapists start incorporating that. I know there's a lot of logistics that go into it, a lot of like planning, a lot of trainings, a lot of things, but I hope to be one of those therapists that incorporates it. And I hope my field starts to kind of like expand upon that more, because I think that's definitely a vein that not only am I curious about, but a lot of my other colleagues definitely want to kind of like see that expansion someday.
Hmm.
Sorry, what
And
were you gonna?
finally, I was going to ask, what sorts of tips or advice would you give to those who want to study the immigrant population in the mental health space?
Gosh, that's a big one. My first thing is I think we still definitely need a lot more literature around the immigrant space. There's been a lot of changes, and I actually remember this from when the time I was in grad school all the way to now. There's definitely more literature, and I'm happy about that. But we just need more therapists, more researchers that work with these specific populations or are from these specific populations to generate more research, just because, again, we're a country full of immigrants, and we are a very important demographic and basis, and all of us have ties and connections towards like the immigrant experience. So for that, we need people to kind of just like talk about that, be curious about that, and continue to kind of like contribute towards funding and research in that specific space. So I hope that people start to kind of like delve into that space a little bit more. I also think too, funding specifically dedicated towards like other pieces of research that we're starting to delve into, so like gender identity, or kind of like trauma with women who've experienced like their immigration stories and what that looks like. All of these sectors definitely deserve more expansion and breadth into what that looks like. Or immigrants who live with like disabilities or different pieces like that. I think all of these spaces and spheres in general don't have as much conversations around them, just because we don't have as many researchers that are kind of like have that lived experience. But I hope that starts to change. And again, I'm a supervisor. I work with a lot of supervisees. And one of my supervisees in particular, she's like kind of delving into expanding in a lot of these sectors because she's very passionate about the work. And I definitely want to encourage the next generation to work towards that and contribute towards that in whatever ways they can. Right.
Mhm. All righty. That, all right. Okie dokie.